Let me reiterate what Dr. Woosley just said about the use of pesticides on hemp crops. All pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, and herbicides, nematicides, all pesticides that are sold and used under federal labeling are strictly illegal in hemp production systems until companies that own these products see it profitable to move forward with label changes. That's going to remain the case. I'll report very quickly that we have an ongoing discussion with Syngenta to conduct an efficacy trial with one of their products in 2016. I've talked to Dr. Woosley about duplicating that project on their farm as well. So that's the first step in looking at labeling a product for use in hemp. But today there are no products, so we cannot apply herbicides, fungicides, or insecticides to hemp crops. I always start with this slide. So everybody here knows, so I don't have to spend a lot of time on this. There is no hemp research in Kentucky without the KDA. And it doesn't matter where I am or who's in the audience. The fact that they're here today is totally irrelevant. Kentucky is eons ahead of all other states in the country regarding hemp research. And that is, as far as I can tell, almost entirely a function of how the project has been embraced and forwarded by the KDA. So I consider us collectively as very fortunate that our state government has seen fit to move in that direction. I know they and also I get emails and telephone calls every single week from all across the country from the other 25 states that have hemp legislation asking how to do this and how to do that. And 9 times out of 10, I say, call Doris. They're looking to Kentucky's model for consideration in other states, and we are literally leading the industry in that regard. I'm proud of that, but I'm mostly grateful to the efforts of the KDA, from the commissioner all the way down to whoever the lowest on that ladder happens to be. Oh, Luke is the lowest on the ladder. Yeah, good. Okay. I also want to thank quickly the UK administration, Dean Cox and Dean Bennett. Even the president of UK has visited our plot, so we have excellent administrative support there. My boss, the chair of agronomy, we have a direct relationship with the Kentucky Tobacco Research and Development Center. Rich Mundell, where is Rich? Moved to the back. Okay, he's in the back. He's my co-principal investigator. He's an employee of the KTRDC, and so they have shared their infrastructure with us. They've shared some personnel expenses with us, so they've been a big supporter of our work. Lowell Bush is an analytical chemist in that same group that does all of our cannabinoid testing. We've had collaborative work at Eastern and Richmond with Todd and Paul at Western, and we had a little plot at Murray State with Dr. Brandon as well. Several corporate sponsors, many of which are in this room. I'll try to remember to mention them when it's appropriate, but really the hemp team, Rich, our grad student Leah, who speaks next, Mark Sizemore, who works full-time in our area, and then a couple of summer workers. Without them, we wouldn't have anything to report. So I thank them publicly for all that they do. I'm going to start out real quick and go through these very rapidly. Several producers in the room, so some basic agronomic principles that we've either learned on our own or have derived from a body of work from Europe or Canada. So basic agronomic principles. Paul already mentioned some of these in his weed science work, but you don't want to be, if optimal yield, if yield is the key, if that's your goal, you do want to use good corn land. You don't want to be planting hemp on a hillside with shallow soil. You don't want to be planting hemp in ground that won't grow anything else. It is touted as well adapted to marginal lands. Well, you can grow corn on a reclaimed mine site too, but what will the yield be? So the same exact principle applies to hemp. If yield is the goal, you do want to use high quality productive land. It's very important. I could talk about this next point for 20 minutes, no problem. It's very important for crop success to understand the relationship between planting date and variety and crop maturity. This is far more important in grain crops or perhaps CBD crops than it is fiber crops. But hemp being a photosensitive species, it flowers according to day length, not according to how large it is at any point in time. not according to the weather that's occurring, but how long the night period is, which is inversely related to the day period. So we have to keep that in mind. Why is that important? If we end up with a 6-foot crop that we intend to combine for grain, I can promise you that you will regret not having given this factor some consideration, planted later in the year so that crop was only 3 feet tall instead of 6 feet tall. Paul mentioned the difficulty of combining a large crop, and our combines are not engineered to run that material through efficiently. So it's important. You have to understand the relationship between variety and photoperiod and the ultimate maturity of that variety in producing grain and CBD. Good soil moisture, Paul mentioned that. It is imperative. You don't want to plant this in dry ground. Many weed seeds don't require as much moisture as hemp to germinate and get going. So if the hemp's just sitting around waiting for moisture, waiting for a rain, the weeds will not. And since we have no herbicides as tools in hemp production, we are absolutely relying on rapid establishment and canopy closure for our weed control. If you plant in dry soil, the probability of that happening is far less than if you plant in a moist soil. Very important. Very shallow planting depth, absolutely never deeper than 1 inch. We plant at 1/4 inch, so between 1/4 and 1/2 inch would be the preferred planting depth. That's true with no-till and conventional tillage. Especially if you're growing for grain, you need to count on the same inputs we have with corn. 150 units of nitrogen per acre, less in a fiber-only crop, about 50 units per acre. But again, hemp is touted as a low input, adaptable to marginal lands. So that's all true to some extent. But if yield is the optimal goal, if that's what you're shooting for, we really have to think about it just like we do all of the other commodity crops. It takes nitrogen to achieve optimal yields. It takes deep, well-drained soils to accomplish optimal yields. So please keep those in mind. As far as the pH goes, we're looking at preferably somewhere around 6. So just very, very slightly acid tends to encourage optimal hemp growth regardless of the harvestable component that you're after. I've already mentioned no-till and conventional both work. These are seeding rates are general. Okay, there's going to be some tweaking on that over time with our research efforts. But historically, if you're growing it for grain or to harvest the seed, we generally think of 20 to 25 pounds of seed per acre as producing the plant density or populations that are from which you will achieve optimal seed yields. For a dual purpose crop, where we'll harvest the grain first and then subsequently come back and harvest the stems for the fiber, we're going to bump that up a little bit, and that's related to the reason why the seeding rate for a fiber-only crop is so much higher. Fortunately, we have the company in the room that's mainly involved with hemp fiber processing, so correct me if I misspeak, but generally we don't want stems this size. Although maybe having some of those is okay, we would far rather have a lot of stems, many stems that are this size instead of this size. And we would like to have very high uniformity in stem diameter. So we can manipulate that through plant density, through plant populations. If we have few plants per square feet, low number of plants per square feet, we're going to have bigger stems, and we're going to have more variation in diameter of stems. So we plant at this higher seeding rate to manipulate uniformity and stem diameter. Does that make sense? A few shaking heads, maybe? Good. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, so let's move into some research, and I'll move through this pretty quickly. The white and yellow trials are ones that were part of our individual program. The blue trials, some of those you're going to hear from other scientists here at UK today. So I won't go through the whites and yellows because we're going to talk about most of them. But we do have 2 Kentucky Science and Engineering grants here at UK. One is to understand the genetics of oil quality. So what genes are responsible for the omega-3, omega-6 ratio, very positive ratio we found in hemp. And once we discover what genes are responsible, then perhaps we can grow plants that take advantage of that. We also have genetic modification protocols under investigation in a different lab. The first ever hemp refereed article from UK was published about 2 weeks ago in a journal that I've never seen before in my life. but I'm a co-author, but it's authored by scientists at the Center for Applied Energy Research, which is a quasi-independent but still affiliated with UK organization out on Ironworks Pike. And they published a paper about carbonaceous materials from hemp. And long story short, the way carbon atoms are arranged in hemp bast fibers are very conducive to moving electrons very efficiently. So electricity is electrons, that's all it is. And so the flow of electrons through the carbon atoms in hemp bast fibers is very, very efficient. And so that theoretically means that these fibers could be used to produce electrical superconductors and other very efficient non-synthetic electrical superconductors. And so it's real exciting work. And that's a gross overview of what they did. Ag engineering, we have Dr. Stambaugh, but some others in his department are looking at hemp for the energy value. How does it compare to the other feedstocks we've been doing research on for years and years if we co-burn it with coal, or if we try to make ethanol or biodiesel or any of the other bioenergies that we're all used to. We have a scientist this afternoon that's going to speak, well, actually two, that will cover those two items at the bottom, so I'll just skip through those. Okay, what about the field trials that we conducted? So we always use conventional tillage, just like Dr. Woosley. We have the same experimental design, and each treatment is replicated 4 times. We do that for statistical reasons. So our grain trials were at 20 pounds on 16-inch rows. Our fiber and dual purpose trials were at 60 pounds and on more narrow 8-inch rows for that same reason. We want high populations to moderate stem growth there. And we applied nitrogen as needed depending on the trial. So this is the data from Dr. Woosley and Dr. Williams' trial, so I'm just going to skip through that. Okay, so this is our first ever variety trial at UK. And this graph, these series of graphs are to illustrate that these are plant growth parameters, okay, how big they were, when the canopy closed, and how many were flowering on a particular day. So the take-home message from this, you don't see any letters on this graph, right? No A, B's, and C's and D's. So there were no statistical differences among these 4 varieties, France, and the Ukraine. Is where these came from. So they all grew when planted the same day and managed the same way. They all had similar growth patterns. We need to know that. Again, I mentioned that planting date is imperative as far as grain production goes. So if you were considering one of those 4 varieties, they all act the same, at least in our climate and our latitude. However, we did see differences in grain yields among those same 4 varieties at the end of the year. Really only one difference with the Ukrainian variety yielding significantly less than 2 of the French varieties. But I will admit, and I don't mind admitting this, we're not perfect. We're learning right along with you. And I say that literally. And so when is the optimum time to harvest hemp grain? Well, that's hard to know without ever having done it before. So we rely on our colleagues from Canada and our colleagues from Europe, and we give it our best shot. Rich and I agree, as the folks involved with the UK work, that we probably harvested the Ukrainian one a little late, and we lost some to shattering. But we know better now. We learned a great deal last year, so we'll hope that won't be an issue next year. You've all heard about how wonderfully healthy hemp seeds are and hemp oil. So these are the same varieties with a couple of extras added on the end there. 30% and above oil in these hemp seeds, very, very positive. This graph denotes the type of fatty acids that compose the oil in those seeds from a different lab here at UK. And always we talk about the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. And this indicates some differences among those same varieties in that ratio, but still a strong positive ratio of the omega-3 to omega-6. The biggest differences were at the bottom of the graph where the saturated oils or fatty acids are found among these different varieties. So very positive information. This kind of illustrates what I was talking about before. This is a row spacing trial for fiber. And so we had 3 row spacings, 8-inch rows, 16-inch rows, and a broadcast treatment where we just drop the seed on the ground and then cultipack, so it's not seeded in rows. What effect does that have on stem diameters and plant density? And big giant differences is the take-home answer to that. It doesn't have any effect on yield. We get the same dry matter yields from all three of those row spacings, 8, 16, or broadcast seeding. But how many plants per square foot or per acre, whatever unit you want to use, far more plants when they're drilled in rows than when they're broadcast on the surface. So we have far more opportunity to manipulate stem size and uniformity with the drilled treatments compared to the broadcast treatments, and a 20% reduction in stem diameter on average from the drilled treatments compared to the broadcast treatments. So Trey, just quickly, that's all positive, right? Yeah, so he's shaking his head, yes. So it's important that we be able to provide a useful, processable product to those that will end up processing hemp fibers. And so this is one way we can help accomplish that. So this is kind of a variety trial too. Most of the germplasm here was provided by the Kentucky Hemp Seed Research Foundation, which is part of the Italo group. And again, if you don't see any letters, that means there are no differences. And so dual purpose trial, we harvested the grain. This graph indicates that the best yielders were at or above 1,000 pounds. We're pretty happy with that. This is how many plants per acre. There were big differences in this. And so when we choose dual purpose varieties, we'll probably want to choose one that has high plant densities when it's seeded at the same rate, on the same date, and managed the same way. So we probably want one of these varieties that has high plant density, so we have smaller and more uniform stems after we harvest the grain. And then this graph indicates how much straw did we harvest from those plots, and we got up to about a ton of dry matter per acre from a dual purpose crop. We don't know if that's really good or not yet, but we will know more in 2016 at the end of the year. So this trial is sponsored by the Sunstrain Corporation, the entity in Louisville that is processing fiber, where we're comparing two varieties of hemp, Canaf, and we had hoped to compare flax, but it failed. I'm running behind here, so I'm going to move on. But essentially what we have are 3 harvest timings at flowering, which is typically optimal for fiber crops, 45 days after that, and then at full maturity when it's set seed and the seed is shattering, so full maturity. And then 2 harvest methods. We wondered if it would be easier to ret these plants vertically, standing up in the air. Well, how do you do that at flowering when the plant is still actively growing? Well, we used a herbicide. We used glyphosate to kill the plant. And so the plots that you see here that still have green material have been sprayed with glyphosate, and we just used the old-fashioned mowing method on the other half of that plot to see if we could figure out which way was easier, or more importantly, better method to ret these stems. Let me talk about the retting first. It's too early to say, so I can't say with all confidence, but I don't think retting vertically following a herbicide application is going to be very practical for us. So for now, at least, we're going to still rely on the old-fashioned do-retting. However, we are aware of some crops that were not killed by herbicide that matured naturally and retted vertically, and they did very well. And that's true for both Canaf and for hemp. So it definitely needs more investigation. It's a far simpler process. There's less decision-making involved if we ret vertically than if we ret on the ground. It's much more prone to error when we're retting on the ground. So we're going to work on that. So these are yields from those. The first harvest, not much yield. Second harvest, a slightly improved yield, but you'll notice that the hemp declined in the third harvest, while the Whitten Canaf, it continued to increase the entire season. Canaf is a tropical plant. It doesn't flower here until about September, at least the variety that we had. And so we continue to see vegetative growth through the season, whereas both of the varieties of hemp flowered much earlier, and after reproductive growth starts, vegetative growth pretty much ceases. And so across those 3 harvest dates, we see declines in hemp yields, while the Canaf yield continued to increase. So we're excited about Canaf. And it's okay for me to say that in front of this audience. It's a natural fiber, just like hemp is. And so the potential for high yields and the potential for industrial applications is pretty much equivalent to what hemp is. And so I'm thinking that both of those might contribute to that pie. They both might be slices of that pie, and we'll see how that goes. Getting towards the end here, we're really excited about this. although there are several caveats we have to work out. On a farm in Clark County, we got a call from one of the producers, and he said, hey, what about if we in-sile some of our grain hemp? Sure, we'd love to do that. So Rich and I and others drove to the farm and chopped some of their crop and put it in little research silos, which I promise you end up doing the same thing that the big giant silos or the bags do. And hemp in-siled very well. Very, very well. If you're a silage person, it's kind of a matter of taste, right? Silage pretty much stinks to most people, but if you're a silage person, you use it, it can smell very good. And I will tell you that the hemp silage smelled wonderful. It in-siled very, very well. But way more importantly, this is a table that indicates we had 2 varieties, and these are just different samples from the same variety. This last column, relative feed value, and you can't see it in the back of the room, the highest was 173. 173. Alfalfa is 173. So it's just as nutritious as alfalfa. But we have yield issues. We have other silage crops that yield way, way more than a grain crop will in hemp. So we have to work on that. And how do you increase dry matter yield in hemp? You have more stem. More stem's not good when it comes to animal feed. We want less stem, more grain. So we have to work this out. Okay, so we're excited to be part of the program. We were able to host the Senate Majority Leader. He visited the farm. There was no press there. Nobody took pictures. The TV, so he only came to learn about the industry in Kentucky. We were very happy to participate in that. We're hopeful that'll move forward in the very near future. So our research field day is a month later than Western's. It'll be on the 11th of August at the Spindletop Farm. Information about that will be on our website, the address of which is at the bottom here.